Hello, everyone from the real estate community. My name is Kayla Andrade. I am the founder of Ontario Landlords Watch. We are an advocacy group for housing providers, property managers, realtors, paralegals, and even good tenants. Together as a group on Facebook, there's just shy of 7,000. We do have quite a little bit of weight to get into it, but we are a group of landlords really working together to explore different housing solutions and trying to educate our elected officials and our staff, property managers and landlords, just the way that things are being ran in Ontario when it comes to the Residential and Tenancy Act, the Landlord and Tenant Board, municipal policies, and even government housing. If you check out our last video, was regarding rent control. Rent control that the NDP are pushing a bill through, trying to implement full rent control in between tenancies. So meaning that the next tenant pays exactly what the last tenant had paid. And we had lots of comments and it's great. And I really encourage everyone to go back and check on that video and put your comments and put your suggestions into this group, into this thread, in order to really understand what is happening, how catastrophic rent control is going to be, not just for the landlords, but for the tenants. So in this video, I thought this would be a perfect opportunity, not just to highlight, the rent control and the damage that it would cause, but to highlight the damage that has caused landlords because of the Landlord and Tenant Board being such a broken system. And the Landlord and Tenant Board has been such a broken system for quite some time. The Ontario Ombudsman has been actively investigating the issues at the Landlord and Tenant Board for 2 years, and nothing has really gotten any better. And instead, it's getting worse. We're waiting longer and longer for our hearings. We're waiting longer to get our judgments. And we're also dealing with the concept of professional tenants knowing how to avoid evictions. Now, when I have been doing this for 12 years, speaking with landlords, advocating on their behalf, and I've spoken to a lot of landlords who've had some troubling times with the Landlord and Tenant Board and just the rules in general with the Residential and Tenancy Act. But there's a guest that I'm bringing on here tonight who is a property manager who's representing the landlord here on a tenant who is just shy of $20,000 of unpaid rent. And then we're going to bring in Felix Vortsman. He's going to come in and he's going to be able to talk to us and highlight what happened in that case and how can we make it better. And we also have Melissa Dupis, who's a property manager and investor herself. And we're going to meet her and she's going to chime in on what Lucie has been experiencing with the Landlord and Tenant Board. So without further ado, I'm going to bring all three of them in very quickly, just to give a quick introduction of who they are for you. And then we're going to be going on with Lucie so that she can explain what her experience has been like being a property manager here in Ontario. So Lucie, we'll get her on the screen. Thank you so much, Lucie, for being a part of the Canadian Real Estate Channel and Ontario Landlords Watch. And we really, I encourage and I admire the fact that you're coming out and giving your story, because what has happened to you could definitely happen to many other investors and property managers. So I want to thank you for coming on to tell your story.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Kayla. Let me just start by saying we have been in property management for more than 5 years. So this is not new to us. Most of our tenants pay their rent on time and are fabulous. This particular tenant was vetted. He moved in with his son in 20.
Hold on. We're gonna just give it a little description of who you are, and then we're gonna show who's gonna help you and help us with the whole discussion.
Pardon me. Yes.
No, my bad.
Okay.
We want to get into it. It's a good one that landlords are going to be able to learn from the situation. So you've been a property manager for how long?
5 years.
5 years. And in one sentence, how would you describe the Landlord and Tenant Board?
It wasn't too bad. It is broken, terrible, awful right now.
Perfect. Now we're going to bring Felix Vortsman on. He's going to be able to come on, give us a little bit of hey, we're going to give you a sneak peek for everyone. Felix, thanks for coming on. Give us a little bio on who you are and give me one sentence of how you would describe the Landlord and Tenant Board. Oh, you're on mute. This is what happens in your life.
Thank you for having me, Kayla. So I'm a real estate investment coach, a landlord myself. I have a number of properties across the Greater Golden Horseshoe. as far as what's happening with the Landlord Tenant Board right now, it's crashed and burned. You know,
Perfect.
I remember the
Not really.
times. Not perfect at all.
No,
No.
just a perfect sentence to describe it. I think that was where I was going from. So Felix, we're going to get you going back into the weight room. We're going to bring Melissa back on, and then we're going to dive deep into this conversation. Hello, Melissa, who's coming all the way from where right now?
Yeah, so I join you from sunny Belize. It's absolutely gorgeous here, and thank you to Kayla for reaching out to me. I'm happy to join even from here. I run a property management company in Niagara and Hamilton area. I'm a real estate investor, a number of properties in the area myself, and of course expanding down here into the tropical areas as well too, thanks to our atrocious Landlord Tenant Board, who quite frankly I think struggles to even protect and help the people it seems to be intended to. So you know, one word, abomination. I don't know what else to say. It's really awful, and they really need to get their act together.
Thank you, Melissa. We'll get you backstage, and then we'll have Lucie tell her situation and dive deep, because we have Felix and Melissa is going to be at the Ontario Landlords Watch conference that we're hosting October 1st in Cambridge at 1 p.m., where we're going to really highlight the solutions that we're going to be recommending to our elected officials. So stay tuned to the links there, and we're going to be able to make sure that you register before the 15th. But Lucie, I'm all yours, girl. Let's go. What do you got going on for us?
Okay, so sorry that I spoke out of turn.
No.
But bottom line.
This is cool. This is the lie. We were real people. We're never rehearsed. I've never rehearsed anything. We just speak. It's just a natural conversation. I think people enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much. So it was a vetted tenant. He came in with good income. He lived there with his son. He was paying rent almost on time all the time until October of 2021, when he didn't. So he'd been issued N4s prior, but he caught up. So we were not on his tail all the time. And an N4 was issued in October. He didn't pay one penny, nothing. In December, we went through the L1 process. So we filed with the Landlord and Tenant Board for a hearing to evict. We didn't have a hearing until March of this year. So when the hearing finally came up, what happened was, it was supposed to be from 9 till 4, but around 1 o'clock, when it was finally our turn to speak, the chairperson said, "You have an option right now." He asked the tenant, "Are you willing to make any repayments?" And the tenant said something like, "Well, I may be able to pay $500 more a month." Well, this is a gentleman who hasn't paid anything. At this point, it was $10,000 in arrears. He hadn't even tried to communicate with the landlord. And the landlord said, "No, we want an eviction order." So the chairperson said, "I'm sorry, thank you very much. We will be adjourning then, and we'll hear your case at a later date." And that was it, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That was in March. We have not heard anything to date. So we're coming up to what, 6 months, 7 months? Nothing. We've contacted the Landlord and Tenant Board multiple times. There's now a recorded message that says, if you are trying to expedite a hearing within 7 to 8 months of your filing, we can't help you because of the backlog. So it's like, sorry, Mr. Landlord, you just keep paying for the tenant. Not only that, this tenant is living with utilities paid for. So not only is rent outstanding, but we get to pay his utilities on top of the situation. So the landlord is now expected to look after those individuals that can afford or may have come up to an unfortunate situation. And they have to ask for the private individual to look after what is really a joint responsibility of a Canadian citizen. So it is really, really unfair. We contacted the Ombudsman. We contacted our MPP, the Minister of Housing, the Attorney General. And now we've spoken to Kayla just recently, Doug Ford's office. The Ombudsman office said to us, they are in charge of process. They will be monitoring process, but they can have no effect on what exactly the Landlord and Tenant Board is doing. So bottom line, we are not harassing this tenant. He is abusing the landlord, and shamefully, our government is allowing it to happen.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lucie. Unfortunately, Kayla just got bumped out here, so we're going to bring Felix in until Kayla comes back in, if you guys wouldn't mind continuing on from there.
Certainly. So I know what we should have done, and that was probably when we had the hearing. Had we said to the chairperson, yes, we will accept the $500 in addition to his current rent, we may have gotten an order that says if you fail to pay that $500, we could have immediately gone to the sheriff's office for an eviction, but we didn't. And now we're sitting here waiting. We thought it was going to be like a 2-week wait for an adjourned meeting.
My situation has been similar. Let me preface by saying that the vast majority of the tenants that I have are excellent. You know, we do our proper due diligence. I'd say that probably about 95% of the time when things really go off the rails, there's something that's happens in our tenants' personal lives to cause these issues from occurring. And we work very closely with our tenants to try to overcome those issues, right? I remember a time, and if those issues can be, resolved between the landlord and tenant, personally, we obviously have the avenue, both tenants and landlords, to apply to the board to get that resolution for us. I remember the time when that was necessary, became necessary. You know, the timelines to get a hearing was usually about a month. It was a pretty, well-oiled ship, as the saying goes. You know, a hearing usually occurred within 2 to 3 months, and everybody could basically get a resolution that was required, both on the tenant side and the landlord side. That is no longer the case. So, personally speaking, I had a couple of applications personally with the board. One, I basically applied for an L1, L2 application back in October of 2021. It was like pulling teeth trying to expedite this hearing because the issues involved were quite serious. It was a legal 2-unit where the basement tenant decided to keep on tampering with the interconnected smoke alarm systems. Obviously, there were potential fire code violations, safety concerns with all the residents living on the building, but drug use, criminal element coming to the property. And this was the nephew of the main floor tenant that basically, vouched for this tenant to come there to begin with. And despite all of that, I did all my due diligence and everything was checked out. But unbeknownst to me, they were in the early stages of a drug addiction, and things fell apart very, very quickly thereafter. To the point where, we finally got a hearing date 9 months later on July 28th. To this day, it is now 47 days later. I have yet to receive an order from the Landlord Tenant Board. In the meantime, my poor main floor tenant is, dealing with chaos for well over a year. She's been involved with multiple accidents, has mobility issues, and has to contend with abuse by these tenants, fearing for her safety. I literally had the fire department out there twice yesterday when she raised her concerns. I said, listen, my hands are tied. I have to, our obligations under the Residential Tenancies Act as landlords is to ensure the quiet enjoyment of our tenants. I cannot meet those obligations as a result of these Landlord Tenant Board delays, right? So clearly the main floor tenant does not have quiet enjoyment. My hands are tied because this is a Landlord Tenant Board issue, so the police refuses to do anything about it. The fire department just basically made a comment, well, you got to get him out. I'm going, wonderful, how, right? And in the meantime, my main floor tenant is fearing for her safety. I replaced every single smoke alarm in that unit over the past month and a half at a personal expense. It cost me well over $2,000, and that's not even reflected in the order that I'm awaiting. So
how do you expect to, or how do you anticipate you will recoup any of those lost rental incomes that you are speaking of?
Well, as long as the tenant is working, yes, we can probably follow through with a small claims action. once we do receive that landlord tenant board notice. I mean, at this stage, that's not my priority. At this stage, I need to basically ensure the safety of all my residents. That's of paramount importance. I couldn't, personally, I'm a bit luckier because I have multiple units. So as a result of that, I can weather that storm. I would really feel really empathetic and sympathetic to somebody who only maybe a small mom and pop landlord that might have one unit. Now, can you imagine basically having to carry 2 separate mortgages, 2 sets of carrying charges on your property? Then you have a tenant that's damaging all this stuff. And on top of that, having to spend money left and right to ensure proper compliance with fire code needlessly. Like it's absolutely insane. And we're under the mercy of landlord tenant board delays right now. It is not serving landlords. And more importantly, it's not serving tenants right now. Right. Yeah. I can obviously ensure my own tenant safety. Have
you tried to contact any other departments in the government?
Makes no difference. Yeah, listen, I'm sure it's very similar type of situation to your experience dealing with the ombudsman. The police department everybody's pointing fingers at each other. Everybody's helpless. And we're all under the gun because of these landlord tenant board delays. And it's unacceptable. It's bad enough that we have to basically incur the costs as landlords for massive past due rent payments when these things occur. But when the resident's safety is impacted for well over a year as a result of multiple fire code potential violations, that's unacceptable. This is basically the government telling us that, deal with it. At what stage do they basically take action until, a house burns down? We as landlords have done everything right, and there are several deaths in that house as a result of these delays. Simply because our hands are tied, the police won't get involved. The fire department, they can issue orders left and right. But the problem is basically we cannot resolve this issue as long as these perpetrating tenants are in there. And like I said, the vast majority, I cannot underscore this enough, the vast majority of my tenants are excellent. We create win-win situations. But when these type of issues occur, we need expedited resolutions because it's impacting the safety of tenants and all residents within the properties in which they live in.
Felix, you said it well when you said you have multiple properties that can cover the cost. But new landlords that perhaps use their personal residence to buy a property and then find this situation where a tenant doesn't pay rent, we're not going to have the mass availability of rental units if this is the type of situation that a mama and pop have to look after for the rental that they have.
Yeah, you guys got it. Sorry, I had to chime in because I'm like, I flickered lights and then boom, I lost internet, and I'm like, okay, I hope they can handle this one. But you guys are doing a great job just, obviously discussing the situations that you guys are going through with the landlord and tenant board. And I want to bring Melissa on too, because we're going to really dive deep into where this went at the landlord and tenant board for Lucie, as well as yourself. There's no consistency. There's not a proper process in place in order to take on the workload that they have. But let's analyze it. The landlord and tenant board, their number one application is for non-payment of rent. So it's backlogging the landlord and tenant board. And now tenants who are dealing with, a bad landlord, or they're being unlawfully evicted, or the landlord now has an emergency situation happening, illegal acts that are happening at the property, and now cannot get access to justice quick enough. Now, when we look at the process that you have to do from filing the paperwork and waiting your 14 days, now we have the Navigate Tribunals Ontario to kind of help people, but now you're going to be using the Ontario portal in order to file your application and work with communication between your tenant and to try to mediate before they even give you a hearing. So for the idea of removing non-payment of rent from the landlord and tenant board, so that, because it's rent is rent, we really shouldn't have to be going to the landlord and tenant board, dealing with an adjudicator, filing all the paperwork and waiting months and months and months, even years, in order to have a hearing that's being dealt with. So this is where it comes down to trying to analyze the rules and procedures of not having it heard by an adjudicator, but more for a dispute resolution officer to show that someone like this typical tenant who is not communicating with the property manager or the landlord, trying to make payment arrangements, how is this allowed? Because if you have the sticker on the gas station that says stealing gas is theft, what happens? You can be charged of that's $100. Let's say it's $200, but now we're dealing with people of 20,000 or more, because there's many other people who are, because she's still going with this in particular case. Now this is being allowed. So we have to kind of go into the concept of when Lucie's situation is that there was an adjournment from an adjudicator, and there should be the next available date. That's when Lucie should have been able to, the landlord should have been able to have their in particular hearing. Now, Melissa, what's your thought process on removing the non-payment of rent from being heard by an adjudicator in order to alleviate the backlog at the board? Because it's crashing based on what is happening, and it's just getting worse. So how do you think that they're going to be able to handle this workload and having long times? Like, your evidence is submitted 7 days prior to your hearing. I feel like it should be submitted at the time of your application, and then the adjudicator should have a round picture of what's happening in order to try to get that tenant to pay or to leave.
So, and if the noise gets too loud here, please do let me know.
Because you're in Belize looking at other real estate properties, because Ontario is not the great place for you right now.
That's absolutely true. And I see more and more people doing it. There's a lot of talk about affordable housing. Where's all the affordable housing going? Quite frankly, our rental stock is depleting because the average person cannot withstand the financial losses that come with being a landlord. And the people that suffer the most, we talk about lower income people, those on fixed incomes, they struggle the most to find housing because they are determined to be very at risk and uncollectible if they don't pay their rent. If we take that risk away, I think that we would really open the doors, not only to more people wanting to be landlords, because quite frankly, you can't even retire from being a landlord. Even if you die, you're still a landlord. You can't exit this. You can't just say, I don't want to be a landlord anymore. When it comes specifically to non-payment of rent, I see a lot of our clients being very, I'll call it over diligent, shall we say, in terms of what they look at and how they like to screen their tenants, because they're scared of getting caught with someone who's not going to pay rent for a year. And it's a very real risk. If we can find a way to minimize that, I think we'll open the doors to a lot more of our tenants who struggle to find housing because the risk isn't so great to take them on. We will open the door to more people wanting to rent out a secondary suite in their home, because if it doesn't work out and a person's not paying their rent, then they will move along a little bit quicker. If we have other issues such as, endangering other residents in the home or N5 related issues, N7 related issues, those can be heard faster because we're not bogging down the board with something as simple and straightforward as non-payment of rent. Quite frankly, we're the only business out there that I can think of that can't say, no, we don't want this client anymore. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I think that everyone suffers. Good landlords suffer, good tenants suffer, and we need to see some change here. And I think it feels like we're going in reverse.
It's exactly, we're going backwards. And I think the way that the Landlord Tenant Board is almost using, landlords as a social agency to house people until, for as long as they possibly can, because once they are evicted, they do become an issue that municipalities have to deal with and the regions have to deal with when a tenant is in need of government housing. And that is obviously very costly on the taxpayers as well. And I want everyone to put in the comments about if you're going through a situation like this with the Landlord Tenant Board, or you've waited such a long period of time dealing with the Landlord Tenant Board, try to have your cases heard, or it's gotten thrown out for minor issues. Like, this is where we have to adopt a policy where, let's say you get to the board and everything is great, but when you have an issue now with, you forgot a unit number, or the spelling is not right, or you haven't signed it, or it's not dated, it's now thrown out and it's back into that pile in order to be rescheduled again. So we have to kind of streamline this approach of the scheduling, and it has to be quicker. So it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon when Lucie had, they end up having to adjourn this hearing, but at the same time, like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, like what's going on here? We don't even work 9 to 5 at the Landlord and Tenant Board anymore. And instead there should be some overtime, some nighttime hearings in order to alleviate the backlog. That's usually overtime, just like the factory works kind of tend to do it. So we do have to kind of put our thought process in if we did remove it from an adjudicator, and we know people do fall into hardship situations, that's why I always tell my landlords, always look for the local service managers in your area, because they will help tenants out with rent relief. Send that information to your tenant, help the ones who are struggling, and make sure that we can get a fast and effective system in order to deal with tenants who are professionally abusing the system. And a lot of people may disagree at the concept that, you know, we do have bad tenants that are out there ruining it for the good ones, but we're all in it together. Just like we get restrictions as landlords because of the bad landlords. So we really need to be working together on a proper solution. And I think definitely for the Landlord and Tenant Board being bogged down over the non-payment of rent, that needs to be the number one concern that everyone should be having, because we're losing our housing supply. And this is where people are going to feel the push. They're going to feel the squeeze. They're going to feel that threat as, you know, they're struggling to get into other accommodations. And that is because of the way that the Landlord and Tenant Board is enacting. So always make your complaint to the ombudsman. They can't do anything about it, but at least getting the complaint process in there, contacting your MPP, contacting your MP, your municipal and regional councillors. You have to make some noise in order to do this and to fix this system, not only for all parties involved, but for taxpayers, because it all is going down really quickly. Now, Felix, what would you say is the problem at the Landlord and Tenant Board with the adjudicators dealing with the non-payment of rent? So you're in front of an adjudicator and it's a clear tenant has not paid. What would be, and it's not a slam dunk as people would think would be to get an eviction. What would you think the number one issue would be of a stay, so to speak, if I get my drift?
No, I tend to represent myself on the Landlord Tenant Board. Maybe I'm a masochist, so I've had a couple of hearings over my career as a landlord. You know, things that basically happen in favor of the tenants. I mean, the tenants can blatantly lie, right? They can say, "Hey, I'm going through cancer treatments," even though they don't have cancer, or "We're sick," or, you know, "I lost my," you know, the sob stories. Now, some of them are valid, right? And for the valid reasons, as responsible landlords, we work with our tenants for those type of, with respect to those issues. Listen, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, right? So we try to work with our tenants. At least I do, for sure. I'm sure that most of the panel here basically works with their tenants as well. And most landlords basically will work with their tenants to try to resolve those issues in a mutually beneficial manner. We're not there to pull the rug out of anyone, notwithstanding some bad exceptions on both ends. But when you know, a tenant comes to a hearing and blatantly lies, and the adjudicator fails to ask for any evidence to support that and bases their decision on pure lies, that's unacceptable. You know, and they can keep on doing this time and time and time again, right? Falsehoods, lack of evidence, despite the fact that the landlord came in there prepared. They have full evidence to support their application. Other things that can matter, lack of understanding by the adjudicators. You know, a lot of these adjudicators are quite new. You know, I had a hearing on July 28th of this year, and when I expressed my concerns about the delays, the adjudicator had the gall to tell me, "By the way, you should feel lucky that it only took you 9 months, because there's other hearings that are taking way longer. Other landlords are taking way longer to get hearings." And I'm like going, "Are you kidding me? You know, you're trying to make me feel better here. You know, this is not a solution." You know, at the end of the day, you know, the matters associated with my applications were highly serious. They were above and beyond the points associated with non-payment of rent, although non-payment of rent was certainly one of the components. My main concern was the safety of the residents of my own property, right? And the fact that it's taken over a year and these safety concerns have not been addressed, and I'm not able to address them in any other way because, again, my hands are tied, Landlord Tenant Board, by the hands of the Landlord Tenant Board. It's a total mess. And we can go into the nitty-gritty details in regards to all the nuances and quirks and the bugs within their portal systems. Like, I had another hearing last month, and the tenant advised me saying, "By the way, do we need to even attend the hearing because we came up with a payment plan?" And that shocked me, and it'll shock you as well why it shocked me. I was not even aware that a hearing was taking place. I did not get a mail order, and unless I was basically logging into the portal on a daily basis, I would have never known about this hearing was occurring the next day. And you're required as a landlord to provide an update. So I spent half the night basically, compiling this update with respect to this hearing.
And you didn't
how do we
get an
avoid
email?
a lot?
You didn't get an
Nothing.
email, Felix, from the
Nothing.
email that you
Nothing.
used to sign up?
Nothing.
Okay.
And the funny thing is, the hearing that occurred on July 28th, I'm looking at the portal every day because it's been 47 days since the hearing occurred. Still no order. And do you know what the status of the file is? Hearing pending. The hearing occurred already on July 28th. They haven't even updated the status of the file. So I actually sent off an email today to the vice chair of the LTB, still awaiting a response from them to see what the heck is going on. And these are very highly critical issues. I mean, people's safety isn't, my tenants, other tenants, both the perpetrating tenants and the other tenants staying on this property, their lives are potentially in danger because these guys tend to disconnect every single smoke alarm. They did not pay the power. The power has been disconnected to their unit of their own accord because they were responsible for it for non-payment. It's dark like a cave there for 3 months, no power. So you can imagine the safety issues involved with somebody coming home late at night. Somebody can trip, fall, break their head. I'm powerless to do anything about it. And in the meantime, they're disconnecting these smoke alarms and using liquid propane to cook things inside the unit, smoking inside the unit. And I'm powerless. I've had as I mentioned, I've had the fire department there twice yesterday alone within a span of an hour.
So this is where they have the expedited order. So when you have a legal act or legal safety, you have to put in an application at the Landlord and Tenant Board to highlight, is it the landlord's going to be homeless, the new owner is going to be homeless, there's an illegal act, there's some safety. And even though they have that piece of paper and saying that you should be able to get an expedited order within 30 days, guess what? They're not getting those expedited orders within 30 days. And sometimes even if you put it in, they still don't consider that to be an emergency because it's based on the current adjudicator that they have. And there is a mass hiring because they see the backlog. They were able to get funding from the government of $19 million between the Landlord and Tenant Board and the Ontario Land Tribunal, which Land Tribunal is obviously appealing their developments that the cities or the municipalities say no to. And then the Landlord and Tenant Board is obviously backlogged by people not being able to pay rent. So we would like to see, that $19 million be able to go somewhere where it helps the tenants in order to stay on their feet. But even when you get the concept of removing that backlog at the Landlord and Tenant Board and knowing that you have to track the next tenant down in order to try to garnish their wages, and that's why you have a lot of difficulties for tenants who are struggling to find places, people on fixed incomes, because you can't garnish their wages if they're receiving government assistance. So when you have that approach happening, the only thing that landlords can do if they can't garnish their wages is to report that to FrontLobby and Landlord Credit Bureau, which it goes to Equifax. It gets on that credit so that landlords are able to find out who's paying the rent, who are good tenants and should be given the chance, and who is also just abusing the system. We're not going at giving the accountability and holding tenants accountable for their own actions. And even though there's a ton of ways that tenants are able to hold landlords accountable, and that's what they don't get, especially from the NDP side of things, is that we have property standards, we have the Residential and Tenancy Act. The only thing that they're missing is the overall goal of getting them into a hearing that is obviously important to the tenants, something that can't be mediated, that should be heard by an adjudicator. Even the tenants are not even able to seek access to justice. We're getting calls from tenants who have the landlord saying, hey, I need you out in 14 days. And you know what? No, I'm going to tell that tenant their rights because of the fact that some of these landlords are making the other landlords look bad. So this is why we're not even going to be landlords anymore. Everyone's starting, it's snowballing. They're now calling housing providers. It's a small business. We're housing providers. We're trying to help with the housing crisis by creating that supply, but we're not able to do so until they fix the most important aspects of this business. And that's the justice system and the way that our overall rule book of the Residential and Tenancy Act, because we can do more, but they have to sit down and listen to the small landlords because we're 70% of the housing stock. And I don't think anybody really wants to talk about that because the small landlords are the major contributors to housing. Now, if we have more and more landlords having to deal with at least just one tenant that can take them down on that $20,000, what are they going to do? How are they going to recoup that cost? Are they going to now take that property, put it for sale? Are they going to invest their money somewhere, and that new property is going to be taken over by a new owner, and the new owner is now going to have legal rights to occupy that unit? And again, back to the Landlord and Tenant Board, why are we even having hearings at the Landlord and Tenant Board for landlords who want to take over personal use of their own property? If it's 60 days, you have an affidavit, a declaration to state that you plan to live in that unit personally or your family member, and you plan to stay there for at least a year. Why does this need to be disputed at the Landlord and Tenant Board? They've created such a workload for themselves that's not necessary. Lucie, what's your overall feeling that you're dealing with, like, based on what you're going through, like, or as the property manager, and obviously you have the client coming to you going, what's going on here? How did this happen? Like, what's your overall feeling of your experience so far?
Overall feeling is, and put the line to the letter, the government is using the landlord to provide housing for those that are either unfortunately financially incapable or just abusers. And it's gone back to the landlord to help these people out. And the government is just saying, well, I know we have a problem, we're working on it, and it's just taking forever. It is not only doing that for the government, but the tenants are becoming educated on, I don't have to pay rent. I'm going to live 6 months rent free, and good luck trying to collect because I'm on welfare or I don't have a job. Or as you said, maybe I'm a senior and I can't afford to pay. But who wants to be a landlord in this situation?
I believe it's on their answer machine. I think one of the landlords had told me when they call, they talk about how they're backlogged at least 7 months. So it's already teaching tenants who want to abuse the situation to say, "Oh, I'm still good," or it's going to dash the hopes of the tenants, knowing that they're dealing with a very hard situation that they have no control of. And the landlords are obviously could be a bad landlord, because we want to talk about bad landlords as well, not just bad tenants. And then you have poor landlords that are literally losing their financial savings in order, and the retirement plan is they think it's just like a quick get rich quick situation, but in reality, a lot of investors, especially the new ones, they're actually having to dish money out of their own pocket in order to continue to keep investing within that property, right? So, and everything is now changing, but everyone's like, poor tenants. And not all tenants are poor, and not all landlords are rich. So we have to stop painting this brush and knowing that the landlords and the tenants need to be going to the government together and saying, listen, we have a broken system. We need to fix this broken system, because what's happening is that we're losing supply. You want to gain some, but you're not focusing on what you're losing. It's great to say, yes, we just got 15,000 rental units, but if you're losing 10, that is obviously that's not a win, but they want to appear it to be a win because they're playing party politics in the housing industry. Melissa, what would be your most gut-wrenching experience at the Landlord and Tenant Board yourself?
Most gut-wrenching experience. Honestly, it's anyone where you feel helpless. My last time I had to go through, we were granted an expedited hearing on the basis of one tenant threatening another and harassing them, and it still took 7 months end to end to get this tenant out. And I recall the hearings with this adjudicator who the hearings were quite lengthy, and they said, I said, I want an expedited order for this tenant to leave. And this tenant was an older disabled lady who seemed to have some issues, but I had reached out, I had tried everything I could do to help her. And I said, look, I want this eviction order. This was a last resort. We've done everything else. My other tenants need relief. That is an awful feeling as a landlord, to have to evict someone from their home, somewhere affordable that they live for years, and the community that they live in. I feel very strongly about the tenants that live in the properties that we manage and the properties that we own, and about taking care of things. But the bad ones, they make it just awful. And that to me really truly is gut-wrenching. And that hearing was before things got as bad as they are now. So that was about a year ago that happened. Now I have one of the properties we manage, we have a tenant who definitely has some clear mental health issues. We have the worst cockroach infestation there that the exterminator has ever seen. We had to go in, we had to clear it out. We've had multiple treatments. At one point, we observed not only did it remove the smoke detector, but there was a shotgun sitting in the corner of the apartment, and staff were scared to even knock on the door. We called the Niagara Regional Police. God bless them, they took it seriously. They went, they seized the weapon. What are we going to do about this? You know what the situation is right now? He wants us to pay him to actually leave that apartment to go be somewhere where he gets the support that he needs. How is that okay? How is that okay for the other people that live in this building? How is that okay for the people that have to manage it? How is that okay for the landlords that have to? But the reality is that we could be a year away from a hearing. What choice are we left with? We're left with enabling bad behavior from people who need help that we can't and shouldn't have to provide to them, quite frankly. And it's an awful system. It's really hard. It makes it hard on everybody that's involved with it. To me, that's what's gut-wrenching about this. I mean, evicting people from their homes is not the business that we're in. It's the last resort and the end result of a situation we've already tried everything else to work through. It's just not a good place to be.
And this is where you kind of analyze how the Landlord Tenant Board deals with, let's say you have a non-payment of rent, you also have, the engagement, ruining the enjoyment or illegal acts, safety, whatever the case may be. Maybe you want to even throw in that you're now going to be taken over for your own personal use. They always tend to schedule these hearings one at a time. So the same tenant, but it's a different day for a different hearing for a different application. They don't combine the applications together unless you request it. And if you do request it, then what happens is that it now stretches out that availability of where you're going to be put in. So it actually can take longer by trying to combine them. All applications on one tenant should be combined together, but the evidence should be sent in with those type of applications. So it gives the adjudicator time to go through each and every application, look at the situation as a whole, not just based on certain type of applications in play, and be able to handle it in a matter of, okay, landlord has 10 minutes. The tenant has 10 minutes. Questions from the adjudicator, and then have your conclusion. The way that they drag out all these hearings as well is what's obviously taking up valuable time from these adjudicators, and is obviously pushing off hearings that are scheduled for that day for another day, in which Lucie's client had fell through the cracks, and they obviously forgot about it. There's no process in place in order for them to keep on track of the ones that are expedited, new ones that are coming in, ones that have been waited while the board was gone. There was applications that were lost. And they're telling people, if you had a file sent into the Landlord Tenant Board within this time frame, reapply, because there was actually a burp in the system and where they lost these type of applications. So making sure that these landlords are able to still follow up and have someone to talk to. They don't even have anyone to talk to. So how can they literally take a fee from either landlord or tenant and still not provide a service? That's like me saying, hey, I'm selling this chocolate bar. It's $5. They give me the $5, but I don't even give them the chocolate bar. Now that would be bad, and then I'd be considered frauding the public. But this, on the other hand, is allowed, and our adjudicators are at the forefront of dealing with the brunt of this. But the Attorney General, Doug Downey, we have to get Steve Clark, Michael Parson, these are the people who are overseeing everything that is dealing with the housing market. But we have them on social, we have them out there speaking out about, we need to get supply up, but they're not hammering in the issues that all landlords and tenants are faced with. So Felix, if you had an elected official in your face today, what would be the message for them?
Very simple. Ultimately, what it boils down to is, they're currently legislating based on tenant advocacy feedback. Many of these politicians, many of these MPs are failing to sit down with landlords who are clearly operating these businesses and have zero understanding in regards to what we're dealing with. And it's impacting the entire population, both renters, landlords, and society as a whole, as a result. The reality is there is no more affordable housing. Anybody that's on any form of social assistance right now will not be able to find any housing in all of southwestern Ontario unless it's social housing, and social housing has waiting lists in excess of 10 years right now. So, right. So what would I tell them? I would basically tell them one thing, help us help you more than anything else, right? We are here to basically offer solutions, real, practical, effective solutions. And what you guys are instead legislating will only achieve the exact opposite and will only basically hurt the exact same people that you're trying to protect without having that level of knowledge that we as landlords can provide to you. Help us help you, the entire society, the politicians, the tenants, and the landlords, right? Yeah.
I come from a family of tenants. My husband came from the family of landlords. I'm looking for the balance in between in order to make sure that everyone's housed, because in regional Waterloo, encampments are considered to be a form of housing now. This is Canada. We should not be considering this to be acceptable, but they feel like, I think they're beaten and they don't have enough social housing. Taxpayers cannot keep building it, manage it, maintaining and subsidizing social housing, but they keep putting restrictions, and that's why they went after the way that short-term rentals are, or vacancy tax. They know how bad it is, so they're trying to discourage people from leaving it empty or skipping off into short-term rentals to escape the Residential Tenancy Act. Lucie, what would be your message to the elected officials if they were in front of you right now?
If I had a crystal ball and could say this would solve the situation, I would do so. I do have a suggestion though. Mm-hmm. And one is, given the current market, the cost of housing, when a landlord purchases a property to rent it out, it mandates a cost that is associated with the cost of renting. If a tenant is, for all intents and purposes, able to pay, let's say 45%, let's say 95%, if there was some mechanism by which the government could evaluate a subsidy to them to help them afford housing, at least a house would be available for this individual to live in rather than a totally subsidized government house.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, but we do have like local service managers who help with the rent relief. There's a portable housing benefit that people can have access to who are waiting on the government housing waiting list. But in order to get that portable housing benefit, I believe it's around $350. You need to remove yourself off the waiting list for government housing. I'm heard of today that there's another portable housing benefit that people can tap into. I think it's on the federal level. So I'm actually have a staff member from the region sending me those details. So I'll make sure that we bring it back on a future video of what that program is. But deep down, for people who are on OW and ODSP, you can direct the funds to the landlord, but it's always into the power of the tenant to withdraw that power and not have the money sent to the landlord. They can reroute it back to them. This is something that we've always talked about as a solution, because this is obviously a problem that some tenants have with redirecting the money back to themselves, and maybe they spend it and now they start this downhill spiral. So there is needing to be overall support or something of, it's almost like that income. What is that income that they talked about? Everyone got it. It was like a basic income. Yeah, a universal rent relief of some sort, something to really help out. And they have to go through the checks and the bells and the whistles to make sure that those people absolutely need it. If it's checking out their bank statement, checking out, where they work, what kind of income that you have, but there needs to be something to help out the tenants, because we see it too. We see the prices increase, but everything has increased for homeowners. They have increased for the housing providers. So it's a business. You need to work into those costs, and you need to be able to work that into your business. So just like you are losing, $20,000 from that investment, the landlord is going to have to try to recoup that cost. And how is he going to be able to recoup that cost? It's going to be through the next tenant. And that's why the rents now have to increase on that in particular unit, because of the losses that you now just have to incur. Melissa, we got Doug Ford, Doug Downey, Michael, whoever you want to put in there, like what your message would be for them to besides show up at the conference on October 1st, or send a staffer to take notes, because we got from 1 o'clock to 7:30 is going to be jam packed with going through this as a group, so that we can be in person and really hammer home what is exactly needed for our industry.
And I gotta say, I'm really looking forward to that conference. I can't wait for it to come October 1st. So looking forward to seeing everyone and to speaking at that and being a part of that. I think that as a general rule, we see a lot of municipalities taking into their own hands things like landlord licensing, implementing redundant policies around property standards and things that are already in place. I think we need to acknowledge that that is a effect of the problems that we're having at the provincial level and with the Landlord Tenant Board, because the Residential Tenancy Act, even if it was implemented in a timely manner, it would really take care of a lot of these issues. And the municipalities are feeling the struggle of their people, and they're trying to show and demonstrate that they're doing something to help what they feel is a vulnerable population, being tenants. And what they're really doing is confusing people as to where to go for what. What they're doing is adding costs onto the small landlord that are ultimately going to have to be passed on to the tenant, and or the small landlord will be exiting out of the business altogether. And I think that we need to collectively get the right stakeholders at the table to really fix the root of the problem instead of just treating the symptoms, because this is getting out of hand. That's it. That's my message.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, you know, and this is what they come out as their solution, but understanding that there is much better ways to kind of deal with it, but they seem to hide from it because it seems to be, you know, political suicide in order to address these concerns where, you know, not all parties are going to see it from each side. And that's why I like to see it from the tenant side of things. I like to, so definitely keep the comments going, guys, based on, you know, your thought process on what's happening at the Landlord and Tenant Board. But our tenants are in need of justice, our landlords are in need of justice, and our government officials are just let the Landlord and Tenant Board loose. They're supposed to just follow the RTA, but this seems like they're just working their own rules and procedures. And you're right, Melissa, between, you know, St. Catharines trying to implement a $500 to $1,000 fine for a landlord who disconnects a vital service on their tenant because of non-payment of rent. It's also at the concept that you don't know what's in that lease. Are you becoming the adjudicator now as a municipality to look at that lease and say, no, the hydro was in my name. It's in the lease that the tenant was supposed to switch it into their name, and that's why I disconnected it. So this is where we have now too many cooks in the kitchen and nothing's getting cooked. So we have to work on the concept of municipalities got to stay in their line, and we have the province to stay in their line, and then we need, you know, federal government in order to issue some funds down our way in order to help these tenants with the rent relief. Same thing with rent evictions. They're trying to prevent landlords from doing renovations, and I'm like, if we need renovations because we need to provide a safe and clean place for our tenants, but we can't do it around the tenants, we have a problem. If I can't do the renovations because I have a refinance coming and they need to inspect my unit to see how my unit is now preventing me from getting funds for me to keep growing that portfolio, to keep building and improving and creating more of a supply and contributing to society by being able to be a landlord. So you got to see that we have to get all the players at the same table. It's not just landlords and property managers and realtors and paralegals and tenants. We need the municipal, the regional, the federal, the provincial. We all need to get together. And at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, they talk about housing, but no one's getting work done to really address these major issues. It's an iceberg. We have the top half is what everyone is seeing, but underneath there's so many other titles and subjects that are needing to be addressed, but no one wants to dive down and get to see what that's all about. So Lucie, I look forward to helping you get you hopefully an expedited order, see what we can do to make some noise. Hopefully if media's listening to this video, that they reach out to you and get your story so that other people know that they're not alone, because there's many other landlords doing it. And we need to get the story out there, because if we don't, we're going to be losing more supply, and our tenants are going to feel that pinch of not having enough supply of housing. And that is what the main message from our elected official now is. It's a supply and demand issue. And we have the people who are ready to do that supply, but we need the proper tools before we can build something. So give us the proper tools to put in our toolbox in order to help them, you know, help us, help you, help them. We're all in it together, and we're all paying for this, as it's a housing crisis that is is now gone to housing havoc. It's absolutely disgraceful what's happening here. But we do have to peace out tonight, just because we don't want to keep everyone too long for this live. Normally it's a record, but I want to thank everyone for watching. Make sure that you're subscribing to the Canadian Real Estate channel. Also leave your comments of your situation, of what you're dealing with, and we'll try to do our best, all of us, to be able to come on and respond. But we'll be bringing you more issues regarding the Residential and Tenancy Act. But make sure you are registered for the Ontario Landlords Watch Conference before September 15th, so that we can include your dinner within your ticket. So you can see it there right at the bottom. We have our team at the Canadian Real Estate channel making us look fancy here today. So I want to thank them for all their support and being able to allow us to come on and give a voice. And hey guys, if you're a tenant and you are dealing with something, I want to hear from you too. So make sure you put something in the comments, and we'll get you on for a Facebook Live or a YouTube Live in order to talk about it, because nothing's going to get accomplished if we don't talk about it. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you into the Ontario Landlords Watch Facebook group, and we'll make sure that we see you at the Ontario Landlords Watch Conference in Cambridge on October 1st. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. And we'll make sure we put a link so that if anyone wants to reach out to you, we'll make sure that we get that into the comments as well.